Good morning and welcome to another AHOLA webinar discussion. This is Oscar, and today we will discuss pay transparency in Ohio. Before we begin, a couple of housekeeping items. Going forward, we will no longer continue with our different webinar series. All of our sessions will focus on trends and compliance in the payroll, HCM, and HR landscape. Our intent is to keep you aware and informed of trends, laws, policies, as well as best practices when navigating your business day to day. Any questions during this discussion can be sent or forwarded to the chat box on the Teams meeting, or feel free to email us at training@ahola.com. We'll be able to field those questions and provide you answers after the discussion. So with that, let's get started. For those of you who may not know a lot about AHOLA, we are a family-owned payroll and HR service provider headquartered in Brecksville, Ohio, with over 57 years of payroll, tax, and HR experience. We've served over 10,000 small businesses nationwide. AHOLA offers a full range of payroll and HR services and software. Today, our staff of payroll, tax, and human resource professionals serve thousands of businesses by helping them with their human capital management needs. So I'm not going to be the one giving the presentation today. We do have a special guest, and I'm happy to introduce Tina Stewart McGinty. She is our human resource consultant here at the AHOLA Corporation. Tina has around 12 to 13 years of HR experience, so there's no one better to give this presentation and discuss pay transparency in Ohio. With that, I'm going to let Tina take over. So Tina, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'm happy to hear what you have to say.
Thanks, Oscar. Happy to be here. So as Oscar said, we're going to spend a little bit of time today talking about pay transparency. So here's just an agenda kind of keep us on track. We're going to start by defining pay transparency, talking about the difference between full and partial transparency. We'll look at some compliance considerations, so understanding what the federal laws are around pay transparency, but also diving into what some of those laws look like in Ohio. We're going to talk about the benefits of pay transparency and how you can promote fairness, reduce pay gaps, and enhance your employee morale. We're going to look at some of the challenges and solutions, right? Because pay transparency is a process and it's something that does have some challenges that go along with it. But then we're going to talk about some different steps to help you and your organizations implement pay transparency. Just a quick legal disclaimer before we begin. We are not attorneys. This session is intended to be informational and educational. We hope that you find it helpful and informative, but please note that nothing shared today should be construed as legal advice. As always, if you have any questions about how this information might affect your organization, please make sure that you talk with your attorney or your business advisor. So what is pay transparency? So pay transparency looks a little bit different in different lenses, but really as a whole, it refers to sharing information about pay and compensation with applicants, employees, and sometimes the public. There are some state and localities that require various degrees of pay transparency, but it really can be a lot more than just what the law tells you that you have to do. So there are different types of ways to look at it. We're going to talk a little bit about full and partial transparency, but I also want to note that being transparent about compensation can also be being open with your organization about how those compensation decisions are actually made. So there has been a large uptick in recent years around pay transparency. I would say a lot of that really is, one, due to the changing legislation that we'll get into shortly, but also two, a lot of organizations are starting to see the benefits of pay transparency and what that can mean for their organizations and their employees. But let's take a little bit closer look here at full and partial. So full transparency is not super common, if we're being honest. Really, this is when organizations are really publishing, spreadsheets or all of the information about, what the compensation is for the various jobs, sometimes specific to, very specific roles. And they're sharing that either across their organization or sometimes even externally. There are some organizations like Whole Foods and Trader Joe's that are really recognized for their pay transparency and sharing that information. But like I said, this isn't something that is right for every organization, nor is it something that many organizations are doing. So far more common is what we like to call partial transparency. And as I said before, there's going to be varying degrees for this. So some examples of what partial transparency could be might be posting a salary range when you've got a job advertisement posted out there. It might be that maybe people on a particular team or in a department know what the salary ranges and the banding is for their department, but maybe they don't know it for the full organization. So those would be examples of different types of partial pay transparency. And again, whether or not you want to have full or partial transparency within your organization, the goal really should be to make sure that you're being equitable in how you're paying employees, and really trying to make sure that you're being compliant and taking a look at how that's going to help your organization overall. So here we can see 42% of HR professionals say that their organization operates in a location that requires pay ranges to be included in job postings. But it also states here that 67% of HR professionals say that they're voluntarily listing this information anyway. So what I want to point out that's important here is that we're seeing statistically that more organizations are doing it, whether or not they're being told that they have to. And that is, lends well to the trend that we're starting to see with this pay transparency. And as we go further through the conversation today, it really is important to have a proactive approach to something like pay transparency to get ahead of it before the law is requiring you to do something, because there really are a lot of things to take into consideration when you're taking those steps. And so pay transparency is something that's not just a today battle, right? This is something that's been going on for decades. It's not just a recent trend. So I would say things really started back in 1963 with the passing of the Equal Pay Act. And this was stating that employees working at the same establishment may not be discriminated against by their employer based on sex for jobs that require substantially equal skill, effort, responsibility, and that are performed under similar working conditions. So there's a few words bolded here, and that's intentional, because they are substantially equal and similar. It does not say that they have to be the exact same job. So that's something important for people to be aware of. And really, again, employers should be basing pay on the factors that are performed in the job, not content that maybe they think is important or something such as, again, somebody's sex or their gender. But this was really the first law that was put into effect to protect workers from pay discrimination. And it covers more than just your base compensation. So this law was designed to cover things like overtime pay, bonuses, vacation, and holiday pay as well. Another important thing to note is that if organizations found that there were some discrepancies or inequality in wages between people of different sexes, it was illegal to take the pay of one person down. So the requirement was that to make things right, they needed to raise the pay of the lower paid individual to bring it up to that of the higher paid individual. And there are some exceptions to this rule, right? So there were 4 exceptions for having differences in pay. So one is if you have a pay system that's based on merit. The second is a seniority system. Third is paying differently based on the quality or quantity of production. And then 4 is very general, and it's really, again, any factor other than sex that makes sense. But again, if you've got people working in jobs that are substantially equal, for example, again, they should be paid the same thing regardless of, maybe one person has a college degree, right? Sometimes people like to think, oh, well, they have a college degree, so they should make more money. Well, not necessarily. Again, if that's not a requirement for the position and you have other people in the role that don't have a college degree, but again, they're doing substantially the same job, that really shouldn't have a factor in whether or not that person gets paid more. It really should be based on what the job is and the job content. So again, we can't just be looking at differences based on job title. You really need to be looking at the job itself. So the next year, there was the passing of the Civil Rights Act, Title VII. And so this is similar, but a little bit different. So this was specific to covering employers who had 15 or more employees, but broadened it to include race, color, religion, and national origin in addition to sex. And this also was broadened to include all aspects of employment. So not just compensation. This also included hiring, firing, promotions, training, and other terms of employment. But similar to the Equal Pay Act, people had to be similarly situated within their jobs, again, with the tasks, the skills, efforts, responsibility, working conditions, and complexity. So these were great steps towards driving equal pay and making sure that people are not being discriminated against in their pay or other aspects of employment based on some of these protected characteristics. But again, these discrepancies in pay are something that we're still seeing today. So clearly it has not been enough to eradicate any type of pay disparity. So we're going to talk about some more recent legislation that you may have seen. So we're going to start with Ohio as a whole, and then we're going to kind of zoom in on some different major municipalities in Ohio and what their laws look like. So Ohio pay equity very similarly mirrors the laws that we just talked about. So again, employers are not allowed to discriminate on wages based on somebody's race, color, religion, sex, age, national origin, or ancestry. If somebody is found to be paid less, then you need to make the wages right. You need to bring them back up. But the different pay rates can be based on the same things that we talked about previously, which were a seniority or a merit system, a system that's measuring the quantity or quality of production, or any other factor that's not based on these protected classes. So Toledo is the first municipality that we're going to take a look at. And so you'll see here that the Toledo pay transparency is broken down into kind of two prongs here. So we've got disclosure of wages and we have the salary history ban. So across the next four municipalities we're going to look at, the one common theme is that it applies to employers with 15 or more employees in that city. So again, employers who are located in Toledo with 15 or more employees in Toledo have to abide by this pay transparency law, and they have to provide the pay scale for a position if an applicant has made a reasonable request for it and received a conditional offer of employment. But in addition to that, there is a salary history ban. And so what this looks like is employers are not allowed to ask candidates about their prior history of salary. They're not allowed to screen them based on their salary history. They can't rely on that information when deciding whether or not to hire them, or they cannot also use that information when determining what they want to pay that person. And then, of course, as with most HR laws, there's no retaliation. So they cannot retaliate against somebody for not disclosing that information. The thing is, though, is that employers are allowed to discuss their expectations. And so this is a practice that I've been trying to get a lot of my clients in the habit of, which is erasing from your memory any question around asking questions about, what do you currently make, or what did you make in your last role? Because that is becoming more and more common to be illegal in these different municipalities and states. So I don't want my clients to be asking their candidates that question. What I want them to ask instead is, what are your salary expectations for your next role? Or what are you looking to make in this position? And that opens the door for that compensation discussion and understanding what the candidate is looking to make, as opposed to what they made in the past, because what they made in a previous role should not have any bearing on what you pay them for this next role. So the next city is Cincinnati. So similar to Toledo, it's got a disclosure of wages and a salary history ban aspect of it. So again, employers in Cincinnati with 15 or more employees need to provide a pay scale for a position if a candidate makes a reasonable request and receives that conditional offer of employment. And also similar to Toledo, they cannot be asking about the applicant's salary history, screening them for that, relying on that when determining if they're going to hire them or what they're going to pay them, and they cannot retaliate against them. And also similar, they are allowed to have that discussion of the salary expectations. However, there's a little bit of a caveat here. So in the case of Cincinnati, the provisions above do not apply to an applicant who has voluntarily and unprompted disclosed what their salary history is. So a little bit of a caveat there. Moving down to Columbus, so this salary history ban went into effect March of last year. So for Columbus, they just have the salary history ban in effect. And so again, 15 or more employees in the city of Columbus, but it's also a little bit broader than Toledo and Cincinnati in that it also covers benefits and other compensation. So again, the same things in terms of that you can't be asking about their salary history or using that to make decisions, but it's also broadened again to include benefits and other compensation. and they can't refuse to hire or retaliate against anybody for not discussing that. But they are, again, allowed to discuss those expectations. And then finally, new on the scene, we have Cleveland. So this is not effective until October of this year, but something we definitely want to make sure that you all are aware of, because Cleveland is slightly different than what we just talked about for Cincinnati, Toledo, and Columbus. So there is that salary history ban still with the 15 or more employees in Cleveland. Cleveland has a few more exceptions similar to what we talked about in Cincinnati. And so those exceptions include internal candidates, likely because you already know what their salary history information is, at least for where they're working, if they're, if it's somebody in your area, candidates who voluntarily disclose their salary history, and if there is a law that authorizes employers to rely on that pay history. So these are going to be the exceptions to that salary history ban. But Cleveland's doing something different. So in some of those other locations, we talked about how employers would need to disclose the salary band if somebody asks for it. And if they got a conditional offer of employment, Cleveland is saying that, no, you need to post that in your job notifications. It needs to be a reasonable estimate of what the employer expects to pay, and it needs to be included in any job notifications and advertisements, both within and outside the Cleveland area, if the employment is expected to be in Cleveland. So I know a lot of organizations are getting bigger. They've got remote locations. They have, maybe multiple brick and mortar locations. Every company looks a little bit different. But the intent here is, look, if you are working in Cleveland or you expect to be hiring that person to be working in Cleveland, you need to make sure that you're adhering to this pay range information and how you have to post that in your job advertisements. So if this is not something that you are doing today and you advertise in Cleveland and you hire in Cleveland, put this on your radar and be aware that this is coming. And you're going to want to pay close attention to some of the implementation steps that we talk about later, because there are some things that you're going to want to be aware of before you do that. Okay, so that kind of covers some of the legal compliance areas and the things that you need to be aware of, at least from a federal standpoint and in Ohio. But let's talk about what some of these benefits are, because although pay transparency doesn't always feel like the most comfortable thing, it really does have a lot of benefits for your organization if it's done well. So these are just some of the advantages that I want to make sure that we're highlighting. So the first one is your applicant pool. So if candidates are able to see what the pay range is and they know what you're looking for and it's within the range that they're looking for, they're going to be a lot more likely to apply to the position. So pay transparency and job postings has been shown to increase the number of applicants significantly. There are many job seekers who just are flat out unwilling to apply for a position that does not indicate a pay range. And that might be just because they don't want to deal with companies if they don't know they're going to be paying what they want, or it could be that they're really looking for an organization that has that transparency. But either way, it has been shown that posting a salary range increases the number of applicants in your positions. And then similarly, but kind of the opposite, brings up the candidate selection. So while posting a range is going to increase people to apply to it, what it's going to decrease is the number of people who would never have accepted a salary offer ever because what you're posting is less than what they want to make. So most people are going out there looking for a job with the understanding of what they need to make to live comfortably, or what it is that they're expecting to make. So if they see that your job is posted at $50,000 as the top of the range, and they are looking for a position that pays at least $60,000, they're going to weed themselves out from the beginning, and they already know that they don't need to apply to that position. So that's going to be one way that companies are able to really help make sure that the people that are applying are the right people, at least from that compensation perspective. And then next we have compliance. So even if you don't operate with full transparency, which as I said is not super common, but even operating with just some level of partial transparency is really going to make it easier for you to adhere to pay transparency laws. Because again, with the example of Cleveland, if you were already posting reasonable salary ranges with your job postings, then when that Cleveland law comes into effect, you're already meeting half of the requirements. And so there's not going to be a lot of change that you have to do because you're already in line with it. So as your organization starts to work towards these fair pay practices, it's going to help you, one, to be in compliance with those laws, but the other side of it is really just making sure that you're protected from cases of discrimination. If you have strong policies around how your compensation decisions are made, and if they are made on legitimate factors, then there's going to be little to no reason that somebody would be able to come back at you and say that they were being discriminated against in their pay. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. The internal impact. So everybody is genuinely curious about what other people make, right? Am I making the same as my peers? Are they making more than me? What do I need to do to make more money? And so when employees have questions about how pay decisions are made, it's going to be important to address those, because if they can understand the reasoning behind how those decisions are made, they're going to be less likely to think that there's any type of unfair or discriminatory practices taking place. And likewise, if your organization does get to a point where it feels comfortable being transparent with various salary ranges for the different positions within your organization, that's also motivation for some employees as well. Because if I work in a particular role, and I'm looking to make more money, and I can see what the other positions in the organization make, or the next step up from me, that may motivate me to work harder to get those certifications or get that training or complete the things that I need to do to be promoted to that next level, because now I can see what I get to look forward to from a pay perspective if I actually achieve that next step. So the next area is pay gaps. And so again, visibility into how compensation is determined, again, understanding the pay scales, what the framework is really going to ensure that there is fair compensation across your employees. And so part of this is going to be identifying and correcting any type of discrepancies that you uncover. So when you do an audit, taking a look across your organization, if you see that there are pay gaps, addressing those and reducing those pay gaps, because these are all steps towards making you a more compliant organization. And again, it's encouraging companies to take that proactive step to have equal opportunities and addressing any of these inequalities. And then finally, another advantage to this is really just your reputation and your trust. So employees just genuinely feel better about organizations that are transparent, not even just with pay decisions, but with your financial information, who communicate regularly and openly with employees. It builds a lot of that trust, and it increases your reputation, which goes a long way. So it's really important to build that trust early on. So with your applicants, with the candidate employer interaction, or the employee and the employee interaction, building that trust, because that's going to lead to increased morale, increased productivity. Your employees are going to feel more satisfied, and it's going to reduce your turnover. So more and more, we're seeing statistics where the generations coming up are looking for more than just a paycheck. They are looking for an organization that has social responsibility. They're looking for organizations that operate ethically, that value their employees, invest in their employees. And so when employees can see that you are being transparent about some of this information, that just kind of builds that trust with them and is going to encourage them to continue to want to work with you. So we can see here that 82% of US workers are more likely to consider applying to a job if the pay range is listed in the job opening. So again, this just goes back to what we were talking about on the beginning of the prior slide about the benefits related to recruiting and having those job postings, including the salary range. Okay, so some challenges and solutions. I want to walk through a couple of these with you, just some of the more common ones that I have heard when having these discussions with some of my clients. So I would say the biggest one that comes up is really the fear that wage transparency will hurt recruiting when candidates see what other companies are offering. So when I've had conversations before with clients, one example I can share with you is, I was helping a client take a look at some of their applicants, and as phone conversations were starting with those, the feedback that the client was getting was that, they would get to the part of the conversation where they would talk about compensation, and candidates were just basically weeding themselves out right there during that phone screen because they thought the job paid more. Similarly, a lot of job boards will post an estimate. I know Indeed does this, that they will post an estimated salary if you do not post one yourself. And what my client was finding is that the estimated rate was much higher than what they were actually offering for the position. So that was really hurting them because, again, they were getting more people applying that never would have applied had they known what the job actually paid. So this is a real fear, and I definitely understand this one, especially for like smaller organizations that don't feel like they can compete with some of those larger organizations and what they're able to pay. So the recommendation for your solution is really to highlight some of the other benefits that you do have. Do you offer remote work? Do you offer flex time? Can people flex their hours? Can they work a little bit earlier, leave a little bit earlier, or do the inverse and working a little bit later? Are they able to work 4/10s instead of working 5 days at 8 hours a day? Think about some of the unique things that your organization offers and make sure that you're highlighting those things both in your job ads, but also in those early conversations with candidates. Because like I said, a lot of people coming up now are looking for more than just that paycheck. They want that flexibility. They want a company that maybe has parental leave, or maybe one that has pet benefits, or somebody, again, that's just a more socially responsible organization that they can feel good about working for. So think about the other things that you can offer that make you different and more unique besides just what that compensation is. The next challenge is employees who discover their compensation is lower than their peers, and how that can have a negative impact on the environment. So again, you really want to help your employees understand the different factors that impact salary decisions. And so that's going to vary based on organization. I know some places are strictly seniority based, and as you reach certain tenure within the organization, that's when you get your increases, whereas others are more merit based, or again, maybe you have to have a certain number of years of experience or a certain certification. Another big factor that I know sometimes people don't consider is location. So again, if you've got a software developer working in Cleveland and a person doing the exact same job working in New York City, of course, the person working in New York City is going to make more because the cost of living in New York City is so much higher than that in Cleveland. So if you can take the time to have those conversations with your employees, explaining the discrepancies in pay and what the factors are, what the compensation factors are based on, and how you're making those decisions, they're going to feel better about it. They're going to understand it. And then it's going to be, again, when it's based on legitimate factors, it's going to be so much easier to explain to them. But that communication really is key because it goes back to fostering that trust and that engagement that we talked about before. And again, I know that years ago, it was very taboo to talk about pay. You didn't ask anybody else what they made. Companies would even go so far as to tell employees, you cannot ask anybody what they make. You cannot talk about what you make. And it's vastly different now. And so if your organization isn't there yet, you really should be taking some of those steps to get there. Challenge number 3, so compliance concerns in general, employers that are not aware of pay transparency laws in the states or cities in which they are recruiting. So this isn't an important thing for employers to be aware of. I know I've talked with a lot of clients that, start to expand into other states and don't realize that they need to be applying the laws of the places where their employees are working, not just where their brick and mortar or their headquarter location is. So just because you've got, the bulk of your folks in Ohio, but maybe you've got a small satellite location in Michigan, your Michigan folks need to be, they're applicable to have those Michigan laws apply to them. So even if it's not the same as Ohio, you still need to be aware of what those Michigan laws are. And the same is true with these pay transparency laws. So if you're posting in other locations, in other cities, and other states, again, as you saw with the 4 in Ohio, they're all different. So you need to make sure that you're being aware of what those laws are in those other areas so that you can be posting responsibly and making sure that you're doing your due diligence in those areas and staying out of any trouble from a compliance perspective. And then the last one, companies are cited or fined for non-compliance, and they could be creating trust or reputation issues. So what I will say is that with a lot of these pay transparency laws, they're being praised because they're taking steps towards the right direction. But unfortunately, some organizations find loopholes, so to speak. They might be adhering and complying to the way the law is written, but not the true spirit of the law. And so my example for that is around posting realistic salary ranges. So I have seen where employers, will post a salary range, but it might be, a range of $30,000 to $80,000. Now that is not a realistic range. And while sure, they're complying with what the law says, that's not the true spirit of what the law means in trying to get down and helping people understand what they might be able to earn in that position. And so that raises concerns because some companies aren't really facing a lot of retributions for this. Some are just getting like a, hey, you need to do better, but some states are a little bit more stricter and they might issue those fines. But what I will say is that you're not doing yourself any services by doing things like that, right? You really want to make sure that you're kind of following these laws the way they're meant to be, especially around posting those job ranges, because whether or not you are posting the rates and what people are making, I guarantee there's some people on this call who have employees who have gone out there and posted anyway. Glassdoor, Reddit, there's numerous sites where people can go and post things anonymously about what they're making, what the work conditions are like, what the environment is like, what the benefits are like for an organization. So really the way that you can combat that or make sure that you're keeping up with that is to do it yourself. So making sure that you're posting realistic job ranges, that you're being clear and transparent about what your company offers, because that's going to help your reputation as a whole. If people know that they can trust you, that you're going to put that information out there, that they can trust what your organization is doing, it's going to help your reputation. And I'm sure, as most people know, the harm that comes with issues with your reputation can impact you for a very long time. So it can be hard to scrub that stuff off of the internet once people go out there and start to post things. So again, the best thing that I can tell you is to really just get ahead of all of this and post that information yourself. Okay, so I know we've covered a lot so far, but this is really the area that I kind of want to focus on, and that's how you can implement pay transparency in your organization. So before you can even really begin this process, what I would encourage you to do is to really think about what your goals are for making this successful and making these changes in your organization. So what are you trying to do? Are you trying to work towards, pay equality and inclusivity? Are you trying to just boost employee morale? But as you take the next steps towards implementing pay transparency, it's going to be really important for you to keep reminding yourself about what those objectives are and keeping that in the front of your mind as you go through these next steps. So again, if you're trying to ensure that there's equality in the workplace, and as you're working through these steps here, you notice that multiple people are not being paid equally for doing the same job, well, you kind of need to pause things and make sure that you address that before you take some of your next steps. If what you're trying to do is boost employee morale, again, have some of these conversations up front. I mentioned before, some older generations, they're very much used to not talking about their pay. And so the idea of pay transparency may be extremely uncomfortable for them, whereas somebody in a younger generation may be all for it. But what you don't want to do is, while you're taking these steps towards pay transparency, you don't want to just, uncover the veil on everything. And then you have a lot of employees that are upset and disturbed by what's taking place. So you kind of need to take that into consideration, I would say, as you're moving towards this. And so one thing you could do would be to, maybe poll your employees and get an idea from them, get some feedback on what level of pay transparency they feel comfortable with. And this might help you as an organization determine what the best route for your organization is. If moving towards full transparency is something that you want to push for, or maybe you're just going to do that partial pay transparency and you're going to stop there and that's it. But kind of getting that pulse is going to be important for you as an organization. And either way, if you're aiming towards full transparency at the end of the day, I'm always going to encourage you to start with that partial pay transparency and, of course, start internally first. And we'll get into that as we kind of talk through these next steps. So I would say one of the biggest and most important things to do in this process is to stop and audit yourself. You need to conduct an internal audit across your organization, you need to look across your different jobs and determine, are these jobs similarly situated? Are these jobs similarly situated? Again, it's not enough just to look at job title. You really need to take a step back and analyze all the jobs within your organization and what's actually being done. And then taking a look at the pay around those jobs and the people that are being paid to do them. And do you see any inconsistencies? Do you see any disparities? And if you do, you're going to want to fix those because really what you want to avoid is, again, say you haven't done this step yet, and now you are operating in Cleveland and you need to post those job ranges or those salary ranges. And now you've got 3 employees internally who have worked for you for 5 years, seeing that somebody walking in off the street is going to make $5,000 a year more than them. What is that going to do to the morale of the folks that you have on your team already? So that's why you really need to take this internal lens and look internal to your organization first before you can do anything externally. So you need to make sure that you're fixing any of those disparities. So while you're looking at those jobs, looking at the salary bands and the grading that you have set up, does it make sense still? Maybe this was something that was done 10, 15 years ago. Is it keeping up with the cost of living? Do you have these things set up the way that you want them to be? And then before you can really do anything further, you need to make sure that you're truly understanding, again, what's happening within your organization before you can take those next steps. But I will say this should not ever be a one and done part of the process. So this should be something that you do regularly, maybe not yearly, but very regularly, because it is possible that, maybe you go through this process and then something happens down the line that causes there to be pay disparities again, and it's not always intentional, but there can be things that you do that cause that disparate impact. And you need to be aware of that. So you need to go back and review this regularly to make sure that you're continuing to have equitable pay and that there aren't practices in your organization that are causing things to disrupt that. So next in the process is the salary decision process. So, hopefully most of you today already have a policy or a process around how salary decisions are made, but this is going to be the time to review it. And if you don't have one, now's the time to create it. You should be, again, focusing on legitimate factors for how salary decisions are made and how, promotions or increases are made. And it shouldn't be made just on the opinions of management. So you need to really sit down and consider, what are the things that people need to do? Is it based on merit? Is it based on the quality or quantity of their work? Is it on seniority? Is it based on some combination of things? But whatever it is, putting pen to paper and writing that policy and that process out, and then making sure that you communicate it with your management team, because your managers are going to have a big hand in who's being promoted, who's getting increases, and what those look like. So they need to be very well versed in what this process is and how they are involved. Next, we have employee communication. So again, open and transparent communication does loads for your organization. Your employees want to know what's going on. They do not want to be kept in the dark. So the more you can share with them about how decisions are made or what the ranges are, the better. They're going to want to be able to ask questions, and they need to be encouraged to have some type of open discussion. So as you start moving towards a more pay transparent organization, and you're sharing that information, again, make sure there's opportunities for people to give feedback or ask questions. Some of your employees are going to feel very comfortable having an open discussion, maybe in a group meeting about the new process or talking about these salary ranges, but you're going to have some that don't feel so comfortable doing that. So what are some other feedback channels or avenues for them to ask questions or to bring considerations or concerns forward? Because you want to make sure that that communication is a two-way street. Then we have leadership involvement. So definitely make sure that you're including your executives, your managers, your leaders when you're driving any type of change. This is extremely important because 9 times out of 10, if an employee has an issue, who are they going to? They're going to go to their supervisor, their manager. Once in a while, they'll go to HR first, but not typically. So this is not an HR only initiative. This is an organizational initiative. And so your leadership needs to be involved and they need to be aware of what's happening. They need to be aware of the policy so that they can have confident conversations with their employees when they ask questions. So if somebody comes up to a manager and says, I would like to talk with you about my compensation, that manager can confidently sit down and have that conversation. and be open and honest with them about, why it is they're making what they're making. Again, as people start to talk more, they might find out that their peers making more than them. And so they might have questions as to why that is. And that's okay. So you just want to make sure that your leadership is equipped to be able to hold those types of conversations, since they're likely going to be the first person that the employee goes to. And likewise, if that employee has questions, well, how can I earn more money? Or how can I get promoted? Or how can I move to the next level? These are all things that their leadership and their supervisor should be aware of to help foster that conversation. Again, just even purely from an engagement standpoint, for them to feel comfortable working there, for them to know that they have a career path and know what it is that they need to do, that there are clear steps they can take to grow themselves within your organization. And then lastly, there's technology. So as always, use technology to help you where you can, especially with your benchmarking. So if you haven't taken a look at your salary ranges in some time, it's going to be beneficial for you to work with some sort of a platform to figure out what those benchmarks should be. So taking into account things like your company size, your industry, where your company is located. Again, and you might have ranges that differ based on location. I used to work for an organization that had it broken out into these different tiers purely based on location. And you could see where, again, going back to like a software developer, where they would make if they were a software developer 1, 2, or 3, and where it would be based on their location in the United States, because that can have a big impact on what somebody is making. And so taking those things into consideration when you're coming up with what your salary ranges are, but then also using any other type of compensation software to just kind of help you track things, help you keep things in one place and manage that process. Obviously, the more organized you can be, the better. And so really walking away from today, what I want you to really think about is, again, it's okay not to have full transparency. Start small, take those baby steps, but always look internally first. Always make sure that you're kind of getting all of that lined up and cleaned up before you're going to turn anything external. And that's going to just, again, improve your employee morale by making sure that you're taking care of the folks that you have before you start turning some of this stuff externally. But as always, that open communication is so important for your employees, not just with pay transparency, but with any other topic. That's really going to be what helps drive your employees to want to stay with you. And is going to make them feel that they're truly valued and a part of your organization. So making sure that, this is something that can be daunting. It is a long process. It is a lot, but done right, it can really have some benefits for your organization. And so that concludes the topic that I had for us this morning. So here's some more information on just on AHOLA and some additional information on some upcoming webinars and how you can register for those. And I'll turn it back over to Oscar.
Thank you so much, Tina. A lot of insight about what pay transparency can do for companies, even just being proactive, avoiding any future issues when it comes to like the culture of a company. So that was really great. Thank you so much. For everyone in attendance, there was a question and it was just a housekeeping item. The slides as well as a recording of today's discussion will be available to everyone who is registered. So please be on the lookout for that. Also, be on the lookout for our newsletters that go out, which covers any future topics that we may have. So for everyone joining, thank you so much for your participation and attendance. We look forward to speaking with you again. If there are any questions, please feel free to utilize the chat or email us by emailing training@ahola.com. And if not, everyone enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.